Welcome to the Father's Heart Podcast. This is episode 7. Today we're talking about communication.
Don't waste the moments. Don't waste the opportunities for these really what I believe are watershed moments where you can impact the life of your kids. I think there's just a lot of parts of communication where we just really have to be intentional.
Thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoy.
Well, hey, everybody, welcome to the Father's Heart Podcast. I'm Brian Zdrojowy, and this is my co-host, Christian Keller.
What's up, y'all?
And we are back at it for another episode. And
Episode 7.
7. Come on, man. We are
our Sabbath episode.
A Sabbath episode. I love it. And it's been a lot of fun, man. I have had so much just joy in sharing my heart with the people who are listening, checking us out. And I hope it's been rewarding for you. I know Christian and I have enjoyed our conversations, and I always surprise him about what we're going to talk about next.
You keep me on my toes, man.
Yeah,
keep me on my toes.
That's right. So awesome, man. So tell me something new that's happening in your life.
Something new. I love this. I love that you always put me on my toes.
Yeah.
Something new. At the beginning of this year, I really just was determined. I was like, I'm going to spend some time in my reading of the Bible. I'm going to spend some time in places I avoid, and maybe that's bad. Is that bad to admit?
No.
I feel like there's, when I read the Bible, I feel like every year it's the same thing. I read Genesis, and then I read Exodus all the way to the part where they get to Mount Sinai, and then I just dip out. I'm like, I'm good. I don't need any more of this. You just start reading law codes, and you're like, oh Lord, help me. But I just really just felt pressed on by the Lord. I need to, if I'm a disciple of Jesus, then I need to read the things that he read. And I need to spend time thinking about the things that he thought about. And so I've just been, spending a lot of time reading, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Exodus, some of those books of the Bible that I just feel sometimes what do we even do with it? And, a resource that I've been using all the time I love is the Bible Project.
Yes.
They have really awesome videos, but they also have these podcasts, where they just have long form discussions about things. And it just some of the parts of the Bible that are just hard to hold,
right.
They just kind of help you hold it. And I it's an encouragement to just anybody, if you just find the Bible, sometimes hard to approach, or you don't know what to do, it's still worth reading.
Yeah, for sure.
It's still worth, meditating on. And, and honestly, the more you learn about it, you realize something like the book of Numbers, you're that does not sound like a book I want to read. Well, the Hebrew name for the book of Numbers is actually in the wilderness, which is a way cooler name than Numbers.
That's interesting.
And so it's really cool.
That's good.
Something
That's good.
New.
I love that. And just from a practical standpoint, if you're maybe listening to this podcast, checking us out, I always tell people if you're starting a Bible reading plan, maybe that's something that's new for you. I always challenge people to start in the book of John. I think that's the greatest introduction to the life of Jesus in terms of his personality. I think you really get to know him as a person there. And then read those other Gospels and just really take in the ministry of Christ and, again, how he approaches different decisions and life, and so rewarding. And then read through that New Testament and read especially the book of Acts, right? The actions of the early church and the followers of Christ. Because I think if you will read those things first, it gets you grounded in terms of maybe your enjoyment level of reading. And then when you get back into some of the Old Testament, as you described, which I really like that, hard to hold, I think it helps you too to be able to have that lens of where was this headed?
Yeah.
When the children of Israel were marching in the desert and God's trying to bring them into this land of promise, what was he doing? Why was he so particular, right, about how they lived? That he was trying to protect their way of life and protect the purity of how he related to them. And I think you and I have had that conversation before, where it's just how much relationship plays into the parts of the Old Testament maybe where we don't understand it as much, but when we could see it through that filter of how much God loves the world, that he gives us his son, then we could be wow, he was just trying to protect people's hearts more than than anything. So I love that. It's really good. What's something that has challenged you lately? What's something that you've been really challenged by in your reading?
In my reading, I think one of the things that challenges me when I read the Bible, lately I've been reading the book of Deuteronomy. There's this idea about God bringing judgment on people.
Yeah.
And, that word judgment, I think there's actually a better word in our English vernacular that better describes it. It's the word of justice. And so the idea that God brings his justice onto people, even his own people, but also the people of the nations that were not following God.
Yeah.
And so learning how to, hold sometimes things in the Bible that just seem a little bit more archaic or more, that wouldn't necessarily fit into like a 2024 idea mindset.
Yeah.
But learning that God's justice is something that is pure and something that really just goes so far beyond, what sometimes we like. It's comfortable or not comfortable. It's justice. It's holy. It's right.
I love that. And I think that's so important, when you're reading the Bible, to remember that there is culture attached to Scripture. Like it's not just a book that starts here and ends here. And we say all the time, it's a seamless story, but there's history involved in that story. And I think that's really good to say, like, you can't read the Bible with just a 2024 mindset. You've got to do some research and kind of dig in and understand, like, the culture, the times, the pieces around those things, just like you would with anything else.
It's like a conversation. It's like when you're talking to me and I'm talking to you, like, there's certain things that we come to the table with as like an understanding of, like, there's things that you bring to the table. And if I want to fully experience what you have to tell me, I have to acknowledge those things. And then at the same time, I have to acknowledge the things that I'm bringing to the table, the things that I filter conversations through.
That's good.
And so it's like, if you were to say something to me, like, I could choose to filter it in a negative light, or I could choose to filter it in a So for example, if you were to say to me, Christian, dude, why were you, so like, distant or off at staff meeting? What's going on? I could filter that and say, like, oh man, Pastor B's really mad at me and he wants to, eat my lunch and, I'm not acting right. Or I could filter it through like, oh man, Pastor B, he cares about me and he, thinks well of me. And so he's probably just concerned, know? And so it's like, it's just a filter. And so like whenever you have conversations, like, we do that a lot with the Bible.
Yeah.
Like, we'll read the Bible and whatever we're already thinking about God, we just read that over the story.
Yeah, that's so good.
It's true.
So we have to be careful.
Got to be careful.
Be careful how you read it, and to make sure, again, that you're taking into context what is contextual, right? Like all of those important pieces. So that's so good. Awesome. Well, I'm going to totally switch gears because I really want to talk about communication today.
So good.
So it's interesting. You just described reading the Bible as that conversation with God, but I think that communication in relationships particularly is so important. And I think that we kind of overlook its importance sometimes. I think we just hope for the best, and we're not as intentional as we should be. And so that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. And also, something that's just been on my heart over the last couple of weeks that, hey, it's called the Father's Heart. And so one of the things that's been challenging me lately is how parents particularly communicate with their kids. And, my hope is that today, as we talk about some things that perhaps will open up a new dialogue for some dads to have with their sons, and moms with their daughters, and moms with their sons, and dads with their daughters, and just the communication that's so important in the life of a family. And so, again, part of what prompted this in me is just that I have, a lot of people know this, but I have 7 kids and 1 on the way. And so I spend a lot of time with kiddos, and they range in age. So I have a almost 17-year-old daughter. She's turning 17 this year, and all the way down to a 3-year-old little boy, and again, 1 on the way. And so how you communicate with all of those kids is very different. What they need is different. What matters to them is very different. But what I have learned is that communication for all of them is really, really important. And it's very important in our marriage. It's very important in our friendships. It's important in, again, just every relationship. So for me, communication is so like foundational as a Christian. I think there's some principles that we could talk about today that will help you if you're trying to, strive to be a better follower of Jesus. I think there's some things that you need to be intentional about in your communication. So one of those right out of the gate that I think is super important, actually I'll give you a few and then we could talk about this first, is this idea of, what you say is just as important as how you say it. And I think a lot of times we think about like what we're going to say, but we don't necessarily give the time or the energy in how we say it. Another principle I think that's super important is that when you say what you say is really important.
Yeah.
So let's dive into those two thoughts for a minute.
Oh, dude.
And, let's talk about that. Like, how important is it for timing and the how for the content in your relationships?
Oh, it's everything, man. Oh, it's everything. Like, I always think about, like, whenever it comes to, when you want to tell someone, it's, you can't just tell them something good in a bad way because now it's a bad thing.
Yeah.
This might seem like a dumb analogy, but this is how I always think about it. It's like, I love corn, right? I like corn a lot. I don't love it like a lot, but I love it a lot. It's good for this analogy. And like, imagine it's like, if I was to like, Pastor B, here's this delicious corn. Would you like this corn? I gave you this good thing and I give it to you in a good way. Or if I'm be like, take this corn and I just like, shove it in your hands, be like, take this corn. It's like, you might be like, I don't even want this. It's a silly analogy, but it's like, you can give a good thing in a bad way. Or, if you give a bad thing in a good way, it's also bad.
Yeah.
And if you give a bad thing in a bad way, we all know that's bad.
Yeah.
But the way you give something, it actually changes the meaning of it.
Sure.
Because you can say good things, but if it's a good things and, your heart is actually super full of hatred, and then you turn around and talk behind someone's back, now it's like, hey, that's actually, it might have been a good thing, but the motives totally changed it from what it was.
And I think that's a good point. Like, I think your motives in your communication are super important. I think, as we're talking about how we deliver things, I think that, our demeanor, like there's different forms of communication. There's verbal communication, right? There's nonverbal communication, which is that a lot of times it's our body language or our facial expressions. And so I have found that this to be true, that there's times where I'll tell something to my kids and they feel like I'm angry. I've had this happen with friends or coworkers. Like, I'll tell them something and they're like, man, why are you so angry? And I'm like, oh, I'm actually not angry at all. And I think that we have to be intentional about those things. If we're going to really have an impact with how we communicate with others, we have to be intentional, not just about what we're saying, but we have to be intentional about how, and then talk about like the when. I mean, I don't know about you, but for me, I am wired that, if I'm hangry, like if I'm not, well fed and happy and a good spot, like you're not going to get a lot of positivity from me. Like, and that's just one example. If I'm tired, it's not the best time, like to have a serious conversation or to talk about something that's important. So knowing that about myself, well, then I have the responsibility. If I'm the communicator, I have the responsibility to look at all of those factors and think like, is this the best time, or should I reserve this conversation for another time?
Totally.
Yeah.
Growing up, I had a twin brother. I still have. I shouldn't say had. He's still very much alive and well. But I have a twin brother, and growing up, we have very different personalities. Like, I'm very extroverted. I'm very like people oriented. I love to talk to people. And he's very much introverted. He's very much like just, he likes to think about things. He likes to go like, he's totally fine to just go work on a project by himself. And, there would be times where we'd get into a fight or we'd get into an argument. And like me, like, I'm like, oh, let's just deal with this right away. Like, I don't want to sit and think about it. I just want to like let's talk about it, let's resolve and move on, you know? And so like all the time we'd fight, and then literally like 30 seconds later, I'd be like, all right, I'm so sorry, dude, let's talk about it. And he's still mad at me. He hasn't even had time to process through his emotions about like, you know. And so I had to learn, like, you know, I got to give him space. I got to give him time to like process, you know. So even for timing for that, it's like learning just people's different personalities.
Yeah.
And like when, you know, giving some space for let people to like process things out and think things through.
Sure.
You know, and even on the other side of things, knowing that it's okay to like, if someone has a question for you, like pause and take a moment to think about it. You don't have to always have a response immediately, you know?
And I think that's a huge thing with parents. I think a lot of times we feel like this pressure to have an answer, you know, right now. Like, and a lot of times our kids are like, I need to know right now, you know? And it's like teaching our children, hey, you actually don't need to know right now. You just sprung that on me. You're going to have to give me some time to think about that. You're going to have to give me some time to, you know, ask your dad or your mom or whoever you're talking to, right? Like, I think that's a really valuable thing. I think also when we talk about timing, you know, I would also say this, like on the other side of the coin of waiting for the right time, I think sometimes we miss moments. You know, I think for me, one of the greatest times that I have really good talks with my kids particularly is in the car. When we're driving. And a lot of times that's after a practice, whether that's sports or music or whatever that, you know, is that my kids are involved in. But like after those practices, when they're tired and, you know, maybe they had a hard practice, and it's like, it's such a good opportunity for me to ask hard questions and kind of just start digging in. And the craziest conversations have fallen out of those moments because I invested, you know, and I knew that it was a kind of a stretch for my kiddo, and that's really true even with my wife. Like there's just been times when, you know, she was tired, she was worn out, but it's like, this is such a perfect opportunity. We can't let it get by us. And so I think if I would say anything to you today, again, knowing that you have to be intentional about not just what you say, but you have to be intentional about when and how you say those things. Another part of communication for me that I'm super passionate about is, again, we were talking about different kinds of communication, right? So there's those verbal, obviously, conversations that you can have with people. But I think there's a lot of nonverbal cues that we are, you know, not as intentional as we should be. You know, I think you have to learn like some of the ways that you communicate with your body, with your facial expressions. There's times where, you know, you can be very, very much aware of what's being said to you. I am the king of this. You know, I'll be on my phone or, you know, I'll be doing something else and someone's talking to me. I hear everything they say and I can parrot it back. But because I have acted disinterested or maybe I've acted distracted, man, it causes so much, you know, frustration, or it could cause pain or hurt in the other person because they feel devalued. And so I think that's important too, is like learning how to be really present in the moment, to be engaged, you know, with your eyes, be engaged with your posture. You know, I remember taking a class where they talked about your body posture in communication, that, you know, kind of like if you're leaning in, it's because you're interested and you want to hear what the other person's saying. Or if you have more of like a slouched back, kind of in the back of your chair, like it's signaling like, when is this going to be over? You know? And so all those little things that I think we just fail to think about. I don't think we intentionally do those things. I think we unintentionally, you know, miss the opportunity to be intentional in how we communicate. When you think about the relationships in your life, whether it's your brother, your mom, your dad, you know, what are some moments that you would say like have helped you learn how to be a better communicator?
Oh man. You know, I really did have such incredible parents, you know, super present and super, you know, they didn't let me get away with shenanigans, you know. But there was always just a value in our house. You know, we just talked about things. We didn't let things just go by without addressing them. You know, we always, I think basically every single night, we'd always eat dinner as a family. And we would always sit around the dinner table and we just talk about things. And, you know, whether it was, you know, silly or simple, or sometimes it was a little bit more serious, you know, we just, as a family, we didn't let things go unaddressed. Yeah. You know, and that was a huge value for us. And I think, you know, with that, it teaches me, you know, even now it's like, I don't let things go unaddressed in the relationships that I care about. Yeah. You know, and if there's something that is bothering me, like I'm quick to say things because it's like, oh, that was valued. That was modeled for me. Yep. You know,
that's good. That's good. I love that. Like we do that at our house a lot. It's not every meal. Our schedule is insane. But, you know, when we sit around the table together, and you sat around that table with us so many times, but we have that kind of game that we play, what's your favorite thing today? Yeah. You know, and we all go around the table and talk about our highs, you know, of the day. Like what was the thing that stood out to you the most, where you felt like, man, that was the moment that, you know, I felt, you know, the happiest, or I felt the closest to God, or whatever that might look like for each individual. And of course, again, when you have a 3-year-old to a 16-year-old, those moments are going to be very interesting, you know, through the lens of kids. And so, but that's always a fun time. And a lot of times the other thing that I like to do is, depending on who I'm hanging out with, is I like to talk about highs and lows. You know, because I feel like when we talk about our lows, it number one, it reminds us that we're all part of the human race, right? Like we're all hurting, we all have struggles, but it also, as Christians, it gives us something to be able to pray for. It gives us something to be able to talk about, and so that's just a great tool. You know, if you're a mom or a dad out there and you're trying to figure out like how can I break into the life of my kid, you know, and that's, again, as I thought about today's episode, that's really what was on my heart, helping parents really be able to talk to their kids more effectively, maybe give some tools, some tips on, you know, how do you do that most effectively. And again, for me, it's one of the big things is just to utilize the moments that you're presented. So many times I'd rather not, just being honest. Like there's times where, you know, something comes up and I'm thinking, man, I'm busy right now. I don't want to deal with this. But taking those moments and just making an intentional commitment to say, like, this is actually more important.
Oh yeah.
You know,
I can think of so many times where my dad had a project going on and like he could have got that project done in no time, but you know, we would always just like go out and like we just wanted to be near him. We just wanted to be around him. Yeah. And he would just like include us, and like it would take way longer, you know? Yep. But I got so close to my dad, you know, and it wasn't even about learning the project. It was just about being close to him. Yep. You know, and he just gave me, you know, space. And so it's like, I have a great relationship with my dad. I feel like I can talk about anything. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's like that didn't just happen overnight, just because he made space for it.
That's so good. Yeah. You got to make space for people, you know? I think another reality, and maybe you've heard this before, but didn't have like wheels to put on it. People talk about FaceTime with your kids. Like some people say that every child needs at least 15 minutes of one-on-one FaceTime. And I'm just going to tell you right now, I don't have bandwidth for 15 minutes every single day with 7 kids. That doesn't happen. And so for us, we do some of it in groups, right? Like again, around the dinner table. For some of us, for some of the time, we do that through the process of bedtimes. We have special bedtimes for the little kids, different bedtime routines with the older kids. But one of the unique things that we have found to be helpful in our house is that we date our kids. So Jacqueline particularly spends one-on-one time with the boys. I specifically spend one-on-one time with the girls. And of course that alternates. I spend all kinds of time with my son. We're building a truck right now. You know, there's things like that are just more natural, where moms spend time with their daughters, dads spend time with their sons. But we're very intentional to go out on these dates where we literally just take a child alone and listen to them. So I actually took out one of our kids yesterday. It was her birthday, and I very intentionally put my phone on Do Not Disturb and put it down, And here's the thing, like, she probably wouldn't have even noticed or cared because of her age. She's one of the younger ones. But I wanted to make sure that I heard everything she said so that I could actually engage in what mattered to her, what she wanted to talk about. And I used that. There was a couple of neat little conversations that came out of that where, one of the things that just naturally fell out was her talking about some of the hardships of being a PK, right? Being a pastor's kid, and what some of the struggles that she's experienced growing up in that environment. So it gave me a great opportunity to realize, number one, she's feeling some things that I know the older kids have expressed, but I didn't realize that she was picking up on some of those, right? So it gave me the insight, but then it gave me a chance to speak life into it, because all she had to go on was her own feelings. And how many of us know, like, our feelings lie to us, right? Our feelings are deceitful. So to be able to take those moments and speak into it, like, that was priceless. But it wouldn't have happened if I would have gotten distracted on my date. And so do you have any memories of maybe a time when, like, your mom or dad did something special with just you, or or maybe mom, your grandma, your granddad?
I don't know if there's any specific, like, moments that, like, really stick out to me. I know you had kind of mentioned to me this earlier, Henry, you could ask me this question about dating your parents, but there's not really anything that specifically jumps out at me. But one of the things that does really stick out to me is my parents always, having a twin brother, a lot of times you get lumped into this idea of, like, you're the same person or whatever,
right.
But my parents were so, like, I don't know how they did it, because, like, we both demand a lot of attention.
Sure.
Right? But they were both just loved us so uniquely and individually.
That's so good.
And they just championed the things that we were passionate about. Because there was, like, a time in our life where me and my brother both loved kind of similar stuff. But there was a time where we just kind of started to branch out and kind of become, like, our own unique people. And they just championed us. Like, every chance they would just, like, whatever we were interested in, they would just, like, how can we include ourselves? And how can we support this? And
that's great.
And so they just were always so intentional about being present at, recitals. And, they would make a point to, like, if I was leading worship at an event, they would come down for that event, and they would just, show up and be present. But, my family has always, my parents have always done stuff like that.
Sure. That's so good. The power for me and in us, one of the big things, I guess I should say, one of the ways that it's powerful in dating our kids is that, for Jacqueline, when she spends time with Wyatt, she's really, teaching him what it is like to be a man and to treat a woman with respect. She demands that from him. And, a lot of times I'll give him a pep talk before he'll go out with moms, like open her door and, be a man, like, protect her, like, all of those things that I think a lot of times, again, unfortunately, they're lost in our culture.
Yeah.
Where men are, are not acting chivalrous to women. And we don't believe in any way that, our girls need, a man to be sufficient. So I don't feel that way. But man, it's so nice to think about, like, raising a son who's going to treat women with respect and dignity, and encourage them and help them to, to know, like, if he's there, and his sisters feel that now, like, if he's around, they'll say it, like, they feel safer. And it's not because he's this imposing brute. He's just, he's observant, he's kind, he's tender, he's an encourager. And in the same way, I think dads, if you're listening out there, man, dating your daughter is helping them understand, like, how they should be treated, like what their level of expectation should be as a young lady to getting prepared for adulthood. And I think that's something that Jacqueline and I, my wife, said so long ago when even before we had kids, is like, we didn't see ourselves as parents who were raising kids. We saw ourselves as parents who were raising adults. And we kind of made that our mission, that when we launched our kids into adulthood, like, they were ready for it. They're prepared for that. And so I think that's so important. I've told you this story before, but one of the things that kind of drove a point home for me, I was a youth pastor for 12 years, and we were on this trip, And Selena, my oldest, she was little. She was probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 years old, but she was at home. Somebody stayed, with her, and maybe a relative, but she was at home. And me and Jacqueline took this big group of teens on this trip. And so once a day or so, I'd give Selena a call and, talk to her because she missed mom and dad. And so I was talking to her on the phone. I'm sure I kind of changed my voice a little bit, being sweet to her and, daddy loves you and all these kind of things. And I didn't pay attention to who was around me, but, as I, looked back, there was 3 girls, right, sitting on the front row of the van that I was driving. And so I'm talking to Selena and, telling her how much I missed her and I loved her and I was going to bring back a present for her. And she said, well, I want a flower. She told me on the phone, I want a flower. And she had that little sweet voice. And I think I had her on speaker. And I said, well, Daddy's going to bring you home a flower. I'll bring you some flowers home. And I heard one of the girls behind me say, I wish my dad would bring me flowers. And my heart literally sunk. I felt like this moment, I just felt like, how can you not be bringing flowers? How can you not take advantage of those moments? Because they go by so fast. These moments that we have with our kids. And so I thought to myself, literally driving down the road, I thought, oh, you're about to get some flowers, And so when we got to where we were going, it was a city that Jacqueline and I were real familiar with and had some favorite restaurants in this particular town. And so I told the girls, I called Jacqueline and just told her, hey, we're going to do something different tonight. You're going to take all the boys out on a date, and I'm going to take all the girls on a date. And so literally all of the men, the youth workers, and all the boys all went with Jay-Z, and all the girls and the lady chaperones all went with me. And before we went to a restaurant, I stopped at the grocery store and bought dozens of roses and stuck them in the back of the van. Nobody saw. I kind of kept the secret hidden, and nobody saw them. And so we went to these restaurants, and before we left, I had given all the boys instructions. I was like, you're taking my wife out. You better treat her, like a queen, And so I got reports later, of course, from Jacqueline that the boys were just over the top, just treating her with all of this pomp and circumstance. And, she had just such a good time with them. And then, she took advantage of the opportunity to speak into their lives about what does it mean to be men, and to encourage them that way. And so as we get to the restaurant where I'm going, I told everybody wait in the van for a minute. And then as we opened the doors, I stood at the van and I just handed each young lady a rose as they got out of that van. And there was such a visceral reaction to that. I mean, some girls just smiled, said thank you, and it was obvious that wasn't new to them. But there were literally girls that got out of that van and just started weeping. And what challenged me in the moment is that, again, dads are missing this opportunity. Moms, you're missing this opportunity to literally have a deep, meaningful impact with your kids where, you're communicating to them. You're communicating worth to them. You're communicating respect to them. You're communicating to them what expectations should be and should look like. And so I just really wanted to come to you today and just say, look, don't waste the moments. Don't waste the opportunities for these really what I believe are watershed moments where you can impact the life of your kids. And we said at the beginning, these principles really cover a lot of areas in your marriage. Sunday we talked about,
right,
relationships. We didn't only talk about marriage, but we talked about having that uncommon commitment, right? We talked about having the commitment to pursue, to prioritize, to protect. When you think about, again, you obviously have relationships in your life. What are some of the places where maybe that challenged you this weekend, talking about that uncommon commitment to pursue, to protect, to prioritize people in your life?
Yeah, I think that, there's just kind of this thought of relationships should just kind of fall into your lap, because when you're younger, everyone you meet's your friend, and you meet tons of people. But I think one of the realities is as you get older, it just becomes so apparent that it's relationships take work.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of work. And I think especially like even relationships with your kids, it takes work. Like I know firsthand, like my parents, like when you have a kid, like your kid wants to have a relationship with you, right?
Right, of course.
But you can have a shallow relationship,
Mm-hmm.
or you can have something that's special. There's depth there. And so I think one of the things that I was just so challenged by is, when it comes to, just relationships, it's like you can have the relationships that you want if you're willing to put the work in.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes one of the things that you've always said, and this is not necessarily in the context of a marriage or even a family, but it's like if you want even a friendship, it's like if you'll love the people that are in your life that you might even think like, oh, I don't even know if I want to hang out with this person. You might be surprised at what kind of friendships and relationships that are hugely valuable to you.
Yeah.
If you just take the time to invest and just see if there's something there.
Yeah. I think we do. I think we overlook opportunities. I think all of us have, this what my dad would have said is visions of grandeur,
Right.
that we see like this pie in the sky relationship that we want, whether that's in our marriage or a business partnership or whatever that relationship might be. We look across the lane, we compare, we see other relationships. We're like, man, I wish my relationship was more like that. Well, you can have it. You just have to work for it.
Yeah.
You have to be willing to put in the time and the effort and, work on, again, I think the basis of it is communication, being willing to talk. And we, a few episodes ago, we talked about having hard or what we called crucial conversations. Like, I think there's just a lot of parts of communication where we just really have to be intentional.
Yeah. It's
not just kind of willy-nilly. Like, you have to decide, like, this is important to me. I'm going to prioritize it.
Yeah.
I'm going to pursue you. I'm going to make time for you. I'm going to make sure that I'm available,
Yeah.
and that when moments happen, I'm not going to use excuses
Yeah.
to not take advantage of those moments.
Yeah. And I think too, like when it comes to communication, like if you want to have a relationship that goes past the shallow, like past the ankle deep waters of just communication, like I think sometimes it takes like vulnerability to be willing to step out first, and being willing to invite the other person to go there, to like have a deeper conversation. And I think even like I'm so grateful that my parents like were willing to have like deep conversations about things. Even with me when I was younger, like, we didn't just like talk about the weather and sports and we did, but we talked about fun things. But then, they'll ask me like, how's your relationship with God? Like, are you reading the Bible?
Yeah.
Like, how's your thought life? Are you, in a, like those kind of questions. And, at first, like it can be awkward.
And that's
if we let it be.
It's literally what I was going to say. Like, there's conversations that are awkward.
Yeah.
But we need to have them.
Yeah. Right.
They're only awkward because we let them be.
Right.
I've had conversations with my kids that would make other people's heads spin. I know. They're like, oh my gosh, you talk to your kids about that? Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'd rather talk to them about that than them find out through the news or through their friend or, through some other outlet. I'd much rather have weird and strange and what for my child is awkward. It's not awkward for me.
Yeah.
And I think that, particularly, again, I know we're focused a lot today, at least I am, on talking about parents, but I think that one of the struggles that parents have, but this is probably true across the board in relationships, is we want people to like us.
Yeah.
We really do. Like with our kids, we want them to be our friend. And let me just encourage you, if you're out there, you're listening, you're a parent, your job isn't to have friends for kids. Like, your job is to be a parent. And they're not always going to like what you say. They're not always going to agree with what you say. You can have friends, though, if you'll parent well now. Like, you can have friends later, and I look forward to the day that my son, he's 15 now, and we have a really, really tight relationship. But I'm not naive. I'm sure there's going to be a day when, he has some feistiness, some angstiness in him. And in those days, we might not see eye to eye. We might not necessarily in those moments be classified as friends, but I'm going to be his dad.
Yeah.
And he's going to know that I love him, right? And the hope then is that as he grows and matures, perhaps past those moments of his life, full circle is that we'll be best friends at some point. We are right now, so maybe we'll be the kind of exception that we don't lose that moment. But I just think that that's a huge thing, is that people in general are so worried about how others think about them that they aren't willing to have those awkward or hard or important conversations that actually help people grow, mature, and help relationships be healthy.
Yeah. I've found too, like, one of the things that's just been it's always been my downfall, and it's always been the best part, is I've found when I assume people's intentions, it always goes bad every single time. And whenever I ask questions and clarify things, like, I know sometimes, like, I know the hardest moments of communication for me, even with my parents, had just been like when we didn't feel like we were on the same page. Like, it just wasn't connecting there.
Sure.
And, whether that was because, I was young and dumb and didn't know how to communicate well, but my parents taught me that, they modeled that. They always, they asked questions. They're like, hey, why did you do this? Or what are you thinking about this? Or why did you do it this way? Like, even questions like that. And not even a question to, like, correct me, but to put us on the same page. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
That word understanding, it's like, it's the biblical idea, the biblical word. It's like, it's to discern between two things.
Right.
It's like that way, understanding. It's like when you're over here and someone else is over here, it's like, it's learning how to bridge. It's learning how to bridge that gap from one place to another.
Absolutely.
Because it's like, I can have an intention of one thing and you can have an intention. And it's kind of going back to that filter thing. Like, I can filter your motivations through what I think. But if we could just bring them out on the table and get on the same page.
Right.
And then it just, it makes communication way easier.
It does. And, you're not always going to see eye to eye. And that's the truth with, your spouse. That's the truth. Again, every relationship you can think of, there are going to be moments where you can't agree. There's disagreement. And one of the unfortunate realities of the culture we live in is that, the world has equated disagreement with hatred.
Yeah.
And it's not. It's just not. It's not. They're nowhere near each other. You can absolutely have great love in your heart, great respect in your heart, and just disagree. Just say, hey, I just don't see it that way. I have a different vantage point. And again, going back to kids and parents, like, you're absolutely going to have a different vantage point. It's called time.
Right. And
they don't have it. And so they're going to see it through the lens of their peers and through their relationships and other parents, that they get to spend time around. And you can't expect that. You can't, again, we're raising adults. We're not raising kids. And so one of the things that Jacqueline and I have had to embrace, and it's hard, seriously hard, but one of the things that's been beneficial for us is that we have embraced that our kids do think differently than us. They don't always see it exactly like we do. But what we've tried to do is teach them how to be respectful with that disagreement, that you can respect each other and still honor each other and still have healthy, boundaries that you live in. You don't have to be rebellious just because you disagree. And I think that's a process that, again, parents, you have to be intentional about teaching those things to your kids. And you have to get okay in your heart with the fact that even if they are, honoring you, they might not fully agree with you.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah. I wish I'll try to look this up and maybe put it in the show notes of where this quote came from, but there's this really quote I love that it says, submission begins where agreement ends.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that was like, my dad taught me this. He's like, I'm your father, so you're going to honor me as your father. And, he never had to say that with words, but just in the way that he modeled that, we don't necessarily have to think the same way about things, agree on the same thing. But at the end of the day, it's like he just taught me how to honor well.
Right.
It's like I'm going to honor the position that he has in my life. And, by learning that now that I'm in the real world, just like it lets me honor people the way that they deserve to be honored.
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily mean I have to agree with them. I can honor the position.
Exactly.
I don't have to necessarily agree with the person.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's powerful because, that's how when you read scripture and it says things like honor your mother and your father, that your life may be long. Like God attaches a promise to that reality that when we honor, it doesn't say agree with your mother and father that your life may be long on the earth. It says honor them.
Yeah.
Right. And so honor is being willing to, and I love that, submit even when you don't agree, And there's times where maybe if you have a mom or a dad that's not a believer and, living a super sinful lifestyle, and, obviously we're not suggesting today that you just submit to everything that people tell you simply because they have a title or a position. Please don't ever hear that out of my heart, right? That's not the Father's heart either. But I think the truth is that we get a little too hung up on agreement.
Yeah.
And I would just say that if we can get more comfortable with being people who disagree in love and realize that points of view and vantage points and perspective, it's always going to be different, and that's okay. It's okay.
Yeah, I one of the things that my parents did for me that, I find so helpful now, it's like a tool in my tool belt. My parents never made me have to hold in my emotions. I was never the type of person to go lock myself in a room and scream into a pillow.
Yeah.
And but they made me be respectful and honoring, but they held space for if I was angry, you're angry, be angry, let's talk about it. Let's hold space for that. You're gonna respect me because I'm your parents.
Sure.
So there's certain things you can't do, but we can hold space for that emotion.
So good.
And so it's even in that communication, it's that's kind of the maturity of my parents and the wisdom that they had. It's now that tool's in my tool belt. Mm-hmm. It's it lets me, not compartmentalize is the wrong word, but it lets me separate behavior from my emotions. So it's I might be real heated, but it's I can have composure because it's my parents taught me that.
Yeah, that's
and I think that just starts at even a young age. It's just learning how to.
It does,
hold space.
And you model that, and not just in your relationships with kids. You model that in your relationships with your friends. You model that in your relationship with your spouse, because when you are, not just someone who does, but you explain the why behind the what, even in other relationships, when you take the time to intentionally say, this hurt me because, it's not just it hurt me, it's not just I'm offended, but you actually tell the why behind the what. What you do is you give people a chance to process that, and you can't make people grow, but you give them the opportunity to grow. And that's a huge part of communication is helping people learn. If you're really in relationship, you have to learn each other. And so you're offering people an opportunity to kind of look behind the curtain of your life a little bit. It changes how you communicate with each other.
Yeah. I have a question for you.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of thinking on behalf of, someone listening today. I was thinking maybe about some people that are maybe a little bit later in life, have some kids that are older.
Sure.
And they feel like they're a little bit estranged and they don't have good communication now. And they want to. It's a passion in their heart. They want to have communication. What's maybe some encouragement or maybe some advice that you'd give to a parent in that situation?
That's a great question. And I think that, one of the things that I challenge people, I have that question come up from time to time. And the thing that I challenge people is that, never have a closed door mentality. And what I mean by that is, you may disagree strongly, right, with the choices that your child is making or the lifestyle that they're living or, their choices of friends or whatever. You may have this strong, passionate disagreement with them. But if you make that the center of your communication, you're never going to have communication. In other words, if the only thing that you ever say to them is corrective or expressing your disappointment or expressing your frustration, you have closed the door to have communication. And so I would say that the best opportunity that you have if you're talking about trying to repair a relationship is open the door and figure out how to leave the door open. And instead of every conversation ending in a argument or a fight, learn how to just, take the old sage advice from your mom, right? If you don't have anything nice to say, just don't say it. Just reserve it. And I think that we feel like we have to say something. We have to rebuttal. We have to get the last word. And I think if you can learn how to be intentional about just giving people space sometimes to vent. You don't have to agree with them, but they already know that you disagree.
Yeah.
They already know that. Like,
that's a really good point.
And so I think there's this place in our hearts where we feel like, well, I've really got to fight, to get someone to understand. They already understand.
Yeah.
They already know. And they're going to keep trying to press their agenda. And if you keep trying to press your agenda, well, that's just what you're doing. You guys are just
water and ice.
Yep.
Or fire and ice.
Right?
That's what it is.
But if you say, like, I'm gonna break the cycle.
Yeah.
One author describes it as the crazy cycle for marriage. It's out of the book Love and Respect, and the authors talk about this doom loop that relationships get in, because in marriage, man's greatest need is to be respected, and that's not respect that says do what I say. It's the respect of I believe in you, I support you, I want to champion your dreams. Basically, that the wife becomes the greatest cheerleader, right, for her husband, and then respects him as a person. And then the wife's greatest need is to be cherished, to be loved, to be put up, in the man's heart as the queen of the castle. Like, she's the only one that matters to me. And if we will love our spouse that way, so if I'll cherish my wife, then she'll respect me. And if she's respecting me, I love her. But if we do it that way, in other words, if it's conditional, then when it's not happening, well, the reverse happens, and we get in what we call a doom loop, where it's like, well, if she would love me by respecting me, then I would cherish her, and vice versa. So we get into this, and I feel like that loop, you could modify that or adapt that into all of your relationships, because we make conditions.
Yeah.
And so if you have an older child, stop making so many conditions on how they can come through the door. Open the door, leave it open. You don't have to agree. And you loving them and embracing them and giving them encouragement and praying for them is not you giving your vote of approval for things that they might be doing, or, again, lifestyles that they're living. You don't have to approve to do what Jesus told us to do, which was love. And so that's I know it's a long answer, but that's how I would answer it. Like, open the door and leave it open. Stop closing it.
Yeah, no, that's so good. I know we're close to time, but I got one more question for you that's kind of just really, really practical.
Yeah.
Maybe for the parent, or maybe not even parent, but just the person that feels like, I just feel like my conversations are awkward, kind of going back to that awkward conversation, or, it just feels like, I can't get into a deeper conversation. It just feels so, like, maybe what are some practical ways to, like, kill that awkwardness, or maybe take a conversation to a deeper place?
Deeper conversations happen with time. And I think that one of the things that, and I'm an introvert, so I can talk about my struggle, is that it's easy to talk about surface things. It's easy to talk about, your hobbies, or your even to what some people consider deep, talking about, where you grew up, what's your family like? But all of those truly, if we're being honest, are pretty surface level questions, right? I think it's the questions that we ask. I think it's about spending enough time with someone to get enough courage to ask the deeper questions. Most people, if given a chance with someone they trust, will talk about their feelings.
Yeah.
We just tend to make blanket statements that men don't talk about their feelings. I've got lots of guy friends who talk about their feelings with me. And I've got guys that I talk about my feelings with. It's really a matter of built time, built trust, that breaks down those walls. So I would just say this, that if you have a relationship where maybe you don't feel like it's deep, I would just ask you to consider, are you prioritizing enough time for it? Are you giving it enough of your attention? Or are you just trying to go to a deep place too quickly. And I think that's how I would answer that.
That's so good.
Yeah.
I love it.
Cool.
So good.
Well, man, I would just wrap this up then by saying, don't forget how important in communication, whether it's with your spouse, your friends, your coworkers, your kids, that how you say what you say and when you say what you say, it really matters more than you think. And
it does.
Good communication is made better because you're intentional, because you take advantage of the time, you don't waste moments, and you literally pray, seek out opportunities to do those face-to-face moments where, again, whether it's your spouse, if it's your spouse, date them. Be intentional about that. I know we're out of time, but I just got to say it. One of the things that I've heard parents say, well, when my kids grow up, I'll spend more time with my spouse. You won't even like your spouse if you wait until your kids grow up.
Right.
That's such horrible advice.
Yeah.
And a lot of times that happens for new moms. Dads are just kind of along for the ride a lot of times in the beginning stages of kids. And they're just like, yeah, whatever you think. And I would just encourage you, moms, you need time with your spouse, and your kids will actually be better for it. Communication that develops between you and your husband will actually filter into the relationship that he and you have with your kids, because it's what you've heard Christian say today. He had parents that modeled that in front of him. It just makes it easier to learn if you see it happening. So guys, we love you. We're praying for you. We're praying that your communication goes better from here on out. If you have questions, I don't know that we've ever said this, but if you have questions, or maybe there's something that you would love for us to talk about on this podcast, drop us a note. We would love to hear from you, and we would love to see if there's a way to, You can
email us right here on the screen or in the description of the email.
So we'd love to connect with you, and if there's any way that we can help you beyond the podcast, we would love to do that. And but we're praying for you. In fact, I'm going to pray for us today and just ask God to bless you as you're working on communication. Father, we love you so much. God, we're so grateful for the opportunity that we have had today to just talk about this so important topic of conversations and communication. And Lord, we pray that you would help our listeners today. God, those that maybe are struggling with some wayward kids, or maybe just struggling to know how to talk to their kids, or maybe it's an issue with a spouse or a friend, or a kind of a distant relationship with a loved one, whatever that might be today. I'm praying for wisdom and discernment. I'm praying that you give them boldness and courage, Lord, to be very intentional about spending the time, prioritizing, Lord, your truth, to be what is leading them or guiding them, Father, in this relationship. I'm praying that they'll commit that uncommon commitment, Lord, to pursue the relationship more and to protect the relationship, and God, to have those awkward conversations, to have those crucial conversations, but whatever they do, that they would just keep communicating. And Lord, that you would bless them as they communicate more. Help them to make their communication more effective, more impactful, and more intentional. We pray all of those things today in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Well, Pastor B, episode 7.
Yeah, man.
It's in the books, man.
This is a good deal. I had fun today.
Dude, what a great conversation.
Yeah, so important, so important. Hey, guys, we love you. We're so grateful for you tuning in to listen and to be a part of this. And again, I would love to hear from you. I hope you have an incredible couple of weeks, and we'll drop another podcast on the 15th.
Yep. See you then.